Hey, welcome. Sorry for the delay, folks. The inevitable technical difficulties, but we seem to be going now. So, well, great to see everybody. Hey, Antares and Dan.
Hello.
Hello.
So this should be a great discussion. I think we'll just we'll get underway since we're already kind of behind. So just go ahead and get started with do we have the presentation? Something happened to it? Okay. Again, I had to switch screens, so just bear with me while I figure out what happened to my controls.
My husband and I have each decided we don't have enough screens. He has 4 in his office. I have 3 in mine. We're like, we need more.
Yeah, it's well, the joys of and why it's not feeding me where my sharing controls are. See, it's over on the screen. So it's not letting me progress the slides because I switched screens. That is bizarre. So let me try one more time. Where's the control? So let me do resume slideshow. Yeah, where are the controls? Where do I move it? Oh, because I have it all flipped, but the controls just disappeared. All right, hang on, folks. Let me switch this around again. I don't know what's going on. Show presenter view. Yes, that's what I asked for. Hang on. All right, I think I've got it. Share screen. All right. I think all the pieces are finally there. Yes, it's actually moving forward now. So, all right. Apologies for that. So professional. I know. So talking today about empowering your organization with a governance self-assessment. Important topic. I know that it's something internally we're talking a lot about and having a lot of customer conversations on. We have collectively in this panel a lot of experience across the board. So hopefully we'll answer your questions. Feel free to ask questions. We'll try to get to them live. We're trying to get through this in about 30 minutes or so. But the recording on demand will be made available, of course. But ask the questions. We'll try to get to them. And if not, we'll follow up after the session if we don't get to it live. So with that, Antares, if you want to talk about Smarter.
Absolutely. So the Smarter Consulting team has over 30 years of experience in software application development, process improvement, content management. We excel in planning, designing, and implementing Microsoft 365 solutions for businesses nationwide. Smarter Consulting has recently added a training division, and we offer courses on topics like Microsoft products, soft skills, project management. Our newest division is focusing on providing governance support, which leads into our conversation today.
Very much so. Yeah, great customers that are out there. We're again been in this space for a long time. I don't think we've done the math recently of the number of years of experience collectively within SharePoint, for example. But in the space, we partner with all the leading vendors that are out there. So if you do have questions, you have a tool in there, you're looking at a tool. We have opinions, but we also know and partner with kind of all the leading providers, especially around this space, the governance space. And then finally, around the services, part of what Antares just listed out there, but different areas that we work with clients around strategy, productivity, governance administration, a number of different areas. And then about us, so myself really quick. So I'm a 13-time MVP, a regional director as well. I've been in the space been in information management systems and collaboration technology for most of my career, which is 33 years now. And I've been working with SharePoint directly since 2005. So long time in the space. And then, of course, my contact information. So Dan, quick introduction.
Sure. I like to consider myself an MVP baby. I'm 2.5 years old from an MVP perspective in Microsoft 365 apps and services. My award categories this year are Microsoft Teams and Copilot, but I am a pretty seasoned Microsoft certified trainer. I've done that for 24 years now.
And Antares.
Well, and I'm new to the space. So if we're going to add up all the years and take an average, I just brought the average down. I've been in education for over 20 years. I have a master's degree in secondary education, a master's degree in gifted education, a PhD in English. And then I threw all that away. I threw away being a national board certified teacher.
Threw it away.
I shifted gears. I decided to use it in a new way to enter the IT space. We have a friend who talks a lot about when you're talking about IT, you have to make sure everyone in your organization understands. You have to make sure that Brenda in accounting knows what you're talking about. So today I am your Brenda in accounting. So if you are also new to some of these concepts, I'm right there with you and we'll get through it together.
I'm going to occasionally call you Brenda now. Well, Tommy, so what are your perspectives, Dan and Antares, on governance in Microsoft 365? Just very quickly, high level.
So this is the story that I like to tell. When I first started getting into IT and first started looking at Microsoft products, I got on Microsoft Learn, and there was a training called How to Prepare Your Employees for Copilot. And I was like, yes, I can do this. This is going to be like how to hold hands and sing songs and get excited for Copilot. And then it wasn't. The entire training was all governance. And I hadn't thought about it in that way. I hadn't thought about how AI would make it even more important to look at what permissions your documents have and what permissions your employees have. And I was fascinated by the governance aspect of how AI and businesses work.
Besides being a MCT for 24 years, I have 2 first days at Microsoft, Christian. I know we both have that in common, having worked for Microsoft full time. When I started in 2005, the governance was typically whether you were an employee or you were not an employee. They gated the access to the network, resources, et cetera, based on whether you were employed or not. When I went back in 2019, however, things had totally changed from a governance perspective. It took into account who I reported to. It didn't allow me on the network till my manager approved me as a full-time employee. And then much of the information that I had access to was governed based on my role, my required training to get access to resources, and that access wasn't granted forever. So that's how I see, governance in a modern organization. And I like to use Microsoft as an example because it changed dramatically the first time I worked there and the second time I worked there.
Well, even the lifespan of Office 365, now Microsoft 365, it has changed. So I joined Microsoft in 2006 specifically to help launch what has become Office 365. So my team, Microsoft Managed Services, MMS, became BPOS, which was the Business Productivity Online Services. So both terrible names for this. And then, of course, Office 365 rebranded to that when it officially launched. What some people don't know is that all of that effort spun out of Microsoft internal IT. MSIT, they realized, they said, hey, we can productize this capability with Exchange, with hosted, then dedicated servers, but a hosted Exchange and SharePoint and some other tools. And so it was there was a bunch of groups that got kind of put together but spun out of mainly Microsoft IT to go and create this. So initially, you think about that. Most IT organizations, and Microsoft, it was true, it was very organized around information management. It was very locked down. And so they started realizing over time that they needed to provide the ability to lock things down, but they needed to open things up much more for the adoption to actually happen with the platform. So, yeah, Microsoft 365 kind of went through this Office 365, this dip down where it was more open and then up into controls. But what we realized, like over time, in fact, my first presentation on SharePoint that I gave was an internal conference. It used to be called Microsoft Ready. I don't know if they've changed the name for it, but was on governance for SharePoint, and specifically SharePoint Online, then BPOS at the time. And then I also did backup recovery and other kind of stuff. But it spoke to the fact that they were launching this and there was no guidance at all around governance. And so that's something that has evolved and changed over time. One of the reasons why we're doing this session, and it's meant to be higher level, give you some of the salient points that are important here, but why do an assessment? It is healthy, and this is part of what I've talked about my entire Microsoft ecosystem career, to regularly go in and evaluate what is our current state, where do we want to be, what is that future state, and what does it take to get there. That's essentially what the governance assessment is. One, to make sure that your risk profile, your compliance profile is kept up to date, but also looking at how are we doing things today? Is it working? Are we missing things? Are we continually every 6 to 12 months having to bring in outside consultants, which there's nothing wrong with that, bringing in outside consultants to help, but to do cleanup rather than take the necessary steps of putting a proper framework in place and then going and evaluating that, learning from their experiences and constantly improving on that process. That's kind of what this session's all about. So as we always like to say, in fact, Antares and I were talking about this earlier today, it's like I don't care what methodology that you have in place. There's a number of them out there, official and unofficial methodologies for governance that apply to Microsoft 365. Have one, find one, shape one. I often say with methodologies, like, don't go from A to Z on anyone's methodology, out of the book. Apply it to your organization, use what fits and what makes sense. But the idea is that having a methodology, like I'm as a collaboration guy, front end user adoption engagement, like that side of things, I'm focused on certain aspects of governance, and I may not think about the back end, the security, a lot of the other administrative aspects of governance. Having the methodology ensures that you're thinking holistically about all these different areas. And so we're providing a very highest of high level here of we're going to walk through each of these and talk about these, but defining the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, discovering what content do we have, what systems, like what is the size of this thing, creating then a baseline of the system. This is what we're doing today, how we're operating, surveying your people, validating that what's in there, finding out the things. And this is not an if, it's happening. But if people are using tools and storing data in places that are not approved, like in other third-party cloud storage systems. I know it's rare, folks. It's the most common thing. In fact, I would speculate like a third of your IP is sitting on unmanaged, non-visible, non-compliant tools and systems. Then examine your configurations, know how your system is set up, then identify from all those things, identify the gaps, and then create your action plan. And so that's what we'll kind of talk to. Am I missing any steps?
No.
Okay.
That sounds perfect.
So let's talk about each one of these. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on each one. So defining the objectives and scope. So, why is this like, how is this different for different organizations? Any thoughts on that?
I would say that objectives and scopes, if you're talking about internal, might look different than if you're talking about partners and disclosure that needs to happen externally. I like to think about some of the changes that have happened over the MVP, the Most Valuable Professional Award program, in just the 2.5 years I've been involved, Christian. There was an old way of doing things, as I understand, and I'm not sure how long it was before that changed. But from a scope perspective, they changed a lot of things last July, and for the better, with a lot more guidance and not only objective scope, but guidance of what we should do, that type of thing.
Well, if they learn from that data, Microsoft is constantly revising and updating that. It's one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about it a little bit, about you have the Microsoft 365 maturity model. One of the reasons why Microsoft sponsors that, but it's a community-driven effort, because Microsoft recognized they can't they're focused on building things and they have inputs from the community, but it's so much change and so much other discussion that is beyond. Governance isn't just about the tools. Traditionally, governance, it's tools, process, and people being the most important. And yet we always, as I just did, put it at the end. But I when I think of the objectives and scopes, you just brought up a great example, is the objectives and scope from our internal perspective, but what are our external collaboration requirements? I've worked for a couple of companies that locked down external collaboration. They said it's too high risk. They've turned off different features, and that's all fine and dandy. But what happens? We still have to work with people that are outside of our company. And so then we send really inappropriate, from a security standpoint, emails. We're using our personal OneDrives. We're using Dropbox or Box or other tools, third-party tools. And again, moving our IP because it was so locked down and restrictive, because the IT team didn't think of the scope of what people are actually doing. They put in rules and configured the system to block people from getting work done. And I always say that people are like, water running down a hill. You put a rock in front of them and they go right around the rock and run down the hill.
And if you think about business leadership, anybody in business leadership realizes things like external audits. That requires communication externally from your company. So many business leaders get the point that things need to be shared with either trusted partners, external vendors, external partners, where sometimes IT forgets about that. Oh, there is a business need for this to be shared. And I need to make a policy and a scope of where, when, and how those things can be shared.
Well, and as we talk about people, making sure you scope it to the resources you have, and that your objectives aren't to fix everything all at once if you don't have the people available to do that.
Well, the core to all of this, though, is that if you're starting out this conversation of defining the scope for your company through the lens of the technology, then you stop there. First, talk about what the business needs, the culture of the way that people work and are sharing. Not that you're not going to change that, evolve that, but you need to go and look at how people are actually using they're interacting between teams, between internal, external, kind of all of those different factors in the scope, and then start looking at tools and process that need to change to be able to meet the needs of people. The second part of that is documenting, going and auditing the system. This is always working in the migration space for years. This is one of those things where people say, I've got about this much content. Inevitably, when people were going and doing a migration, they were finding treasure troves of content that they weren't aware of. And again, coming from a SharePoint background, most people don't remember SharePoint. SharePoint was that viral, unapproved product that somebody would install on a box below their desk and not tell the admins, not tell IT. And that's one of the ways that SharePoint grew and spread. And so when organizations eventually they say we're going to be moving to the next version, they start finding data and systems and tools and reports and all these things that are being built that they had no idea that were elsewhere in the organization. Again, some that may have been approved and done in the right way, and a lot that hasn't. And so you need to collect that, as well as, I always phrase this as, understand what are the constraints of my system. Like, you have to have documented what are our industry or regional constraints. What are the policies and rules, legal, regulatory, if we work in the banking industry, for example, all of the laws and the rules around the handling of the data, all of those are your constraints. You have to understand what those constraints are for you to collaborate in a healthy, secure, well-governed manner. You need to know what that is, but at the same time, you need to balance that with people need to get work done. You can't make it so locked down. They need to be able to collaborate. So that's part of what governance does, is you're constantly finding what's the common ground, what are the constraints, and then let people go inside of those constraints to go and collaborate.
Collaborate while staying compliant.
Right.
One thing I love about the new MVP program and process is you're told that you can document up to 24 high impact activities that you've done for the community. Instead of just tell us what you've done, now there's a number, and you're not expected to necessarily have to fill out 24, but that there's kind of guidance of how many, and that's one every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, so having that, again, if I understand what the constraints are, mm-hmm. then that frees me up to go and do anything I need to do within that role. And you need to make those things visible and say, look, this is why we shut down like access to Dropbox, like from our network, like we did this, like, here's why. But you can't just, slap the hand and say no, and you cannot do this. Like, you also have to understand what are the users trying to do. Here is the correct way, the approved way of doing that.
I was doing training for a municipality out in Pennsylvania, and I kept on saying in the sessions, they were every 2 hours, WebEx is going away. And somebody raised their hand in a session sometime during the week and said, WebEx is going out of business? And I said, let me rephrase, WebEx is going away for all of you. Teams will be used. WebEx is still a product.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to be not only documenting, but clear in your documentation.
Well, I'm sure in a future session, we'll talk about it. I'm actually doing a couple sessions at conferences this fall where I'm talking about like Microsoft Viva, and specifically looking at Pulse and surveys in general in that space, but creating the right feedback loops. You can't just publish this information. This is part of the transparency. People won't provide feedback if they feel it just goes into a dusty box of suggestions in the lunchroom and no one ever reads them. You need to actually say, have a two-way conversation. And, hey, and Dan, you had this suggestion at the last governance review. Here's what we've actually done. This is what we've implemented. This is what we found. Here's the constraints that we found here, but this is what we can do. Even when people feel heard, they have a voice in that process, even if they don't agree with that end result, like the shutting down Dropbox, that access to that. I'm not trying to beat up on Dropbox out there as an example, folks. So there's nothing wrong with using Dropbox, but not on the surface anyway. But having a conversation of why. We're all adults, we're professionals, like people are more understanding. So they'll be more accepting of the result if they have visibility into the process, which is another why, the whole model of working out loud, it really fits in with the governance space. Here's what we're doing. Here's why. And then a running list of here's the requests. Here's the things that are still out here. Here's our timeline for making these changes. Make that just transparent as possible.
And the reverse example, I had a customer that was using Ignite for file storage. And so they were adopting Teams, but they were wanting to make sure users understood that Ignite for their industry, their use cases, their requirements was their preferred file sharing solution. So it can either go towards a Microsoft ecosystem or towards a third-party ecosystem. If your company has reasons, compliance, other services that might not be available by a particular vendor, might be a reason for going the other direction.
And that goes back to what Christian said. Like, it doesn't matter which framework you use as long as you have one.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, Ignite's a great example too, because they are a Microsoft partner. And so if you're finding that's what the users have or the organization has selected that, there's ways of integrating that into, especially with Teams and integrating that experience in. So again, that's understanding the scope, why that's so important. I mean, the next one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because we're actually going to be doing, talking here about industry best practices and understanding, well, where are others compared to us within it, understanding your space there. This is where, again, go to look at the Microsoft 365 maturity model. We're actually next month on the 25th, where our next webinar, we're going to do a deep dive into that specific topic. But that's something that's also important as part of the scope. And then, as I've talked about, conducting interviews and surveys. So this is something, I'll give a great example. A couple organizations where I led a governance body where we met together initially like weekly, then every other week. And after like 3 months, we went to monthly because we got into the rhythm. We had our governance framework there, but we had that where anyone could come in and discuss, and here's changes that I need. Here's the expansion of the environment that I need. And we discuss the impacts with the stakeholders from around the organization. Well, some people, was again inevitable. I would walk out of that meeting and then they'd come and over my office and have a side conversation about, and I was like, why didn't you speak up? It's like, well, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not sure, but here's what I need. Here's what's not being met. So doing regular surveys, having office hours, doing the formal, meetings. I mean, this is true kind of a management thing as well, but offer up different types of tools and methods for people to provide feedback. Some people will be more comfortable in one method over others. And so you're giving ample opportunity for people to provide feedback in and capture that information.
So Brenda from accounting, if you're watching right now, don't be afraid to speak up.
Right.
Your voice matters.
Of course, go in and understand then your system configurations, how you're set up. If you went default with what was just default setup installed, start using that. I mean, this is part of where the complexity has come. There, like, how many admin centers are there now? I mean, seriously, Microsoft, so many, everything. It's very complex. And if you think about like Purview, and we're going to talk about that in a second here, but Purview, remember, Purview is like Viva. It was a brand put over multiple products, some that are very different, and they're consolidating, they're bringing things in. It's like, but its history is it's like dozens of products and features that got moved into the Purview space. So Microsoft, I think over the next couple of years, we'll see it like reduce the scope there, but that's just an example of not reduce the scope, to aggregate those different pieces and create a more centralized, unified view through that. But I mean, there's just still a lot of parts to that. So understanding and having documented your configurations, and part of that, why that's important, is to understand with people, you see certain user behavior, you're seeing certain complaints about the system, and go and say, oh, it's because we have this turned off, or this is the permissions levels because you have the wrong. I mean, and let's be honest, the core of majority of problems that you have in Microsoft 365 are related to not having the right permissions. So having all that documented and getting into the business of managing the exceptions versus, having too many that are out there is, again, understand the way that they're built, standardize those things, and then it allows you to better manage the exceptions.
Christian, I was just sharing with you today that Microsoft has moved to the Purview portal for one of their compliance and governance courses. And in some of the labs, they have you create an account, use that account, but don't have appropriate permissions assigned to that account. So the labs break unless you either one, assign correct permissions, or two, use an account that has those permissions. So things like that, and even step-by-step guidance sometimes needs to be reported. So as an MCT, I can report that issue.
Yeah, the running joke, of course, with anything Microsoft related is have you tried turning it off and on? The second behind that is, well, it used to be like, have you asked Clippy? No, then the third would be, do you have the right permissions? Let's go in and look at that. And again, that's like the number one issue. When I was working at Microsoft and managed for a very large organization, about 2,000 people in that organization, my team managed all the SharePoint servers. I had a contractor who, this was before a lot of the automation, but his only job his primary role was permission management across all those different systems. And it usually kept him pretty busy all day long, every day. Then, of course, and we're going to gloss over these two most important, the scariest things here, but analyze the data and identify the gaps. There's so much here that's like, it depends. But again, going back and looking at what are our goals? What's the reality on the ground? Where do we think we should be? And then identifying what are the gaps? Like, well, we have policy breakdowns. We have process breakdowns. We don't have the right configurations here. We don't have a set of people trying to do things. They don't have the right licenses, and we keep doing onesie twosie. We need to relook at the roles and responsibilities of users in each of these different areas. I mean, can be a lot of complexity there. So identifying those gaps is a big step, which folds right into the last one of developing an action plan for, how do we move this forward? And part of what we're going to go through in next month's webinar with the maturity model is all about identification of gaps, understanding, okay, here's where we are. And you have to be honest about where you are in this assessment. That's why I was always like to say that, like, when we do assessments for clients, there's like, you self-assess and we provide survey and the details around that. And then we do our assessment, and there's usually a gap. It's always been in place. Like, we overestimate for ourselves. We are blind to a lot of the shortcomings of ourselves, of our own organizations. And so getting that independent view into that is key, because you can't properly plan for the future if you're not realistic about the current state. Really quick here. I know that we just we're going a little bit long. There's just a couple things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the detail of these things, but just to understand some of the things which, I say out of the box or that Microsoft provides, depending on the licenses that you have. But some of the things that Microsoft provides, you have like the Microsoft Secure Store, so it's a Secure Score. So you can go and look at it, provides that guidance on a number of different things, provides recommendations, does that ongoing monitoring of the progress, the completion of those tasks. And I love these kinds of capabilities when companies provide this to show you, like, this is how you're using it. Like, they're basing this off of your, usage analytics and your configurations, and saying, here's what we recommend you go and do. So this is something that you should definitely pay attention to in your organization. You then have Purview, which is massive. We're just going to talk about like the compliance management, manager specifically, but so much of this is about, one, centralizing the visibility into what policies do we have out there, what are our compliance policies that are out there. It does have regulatory templates for some of the leading things. So if you need to become SOX compliant, if you have to comply with the things around GDPR, all those different things, it can help you identify those gaps. And again, gives you recommendations. This is what you need to be doing, and help you track that progress. But already we've just shown there's a lot of great data, 2 different places for a lot of that data. Well, let's add 2 more places for all of that data. You then, of course, have the admin center. I don't think I need to spend any time on this, but this is like access and usage and kind of all those different things that you have through the admin center. And then the last one being Defender, which is more on the security side of those things. So here are 4 huge buckets of data gathering as part of your assessment and that you need to be regularly reviewing. So this is where having a framework in place helps to get through all that. Before I get into the kind of, this is the we've got, I think, 3 more slides here, but any other thoughts on using the complexity of tools?
Well, what I like about them, what I was going to say is I love a good color-coded report. And that's what I like about these reports is that I don't have to have a full technical background to be able to quickly understand the data and know where we are and where the gaps are.
We've come a long way since the old days of getting like system prompts and an error message. Like, what does this mean? It's like you have to have the reader, like for your car. I drive a German car, and so I can't fix anything on my own car. But with the code reader, it's like, oh, got that code. Well, that could mean like a dozen different things. And it's like, well, great. Well, Microsoft error messaging used to be a lot like that. Still is in some places, but they've really tried to update that through their admin capabilities to provide more of that actionable dashboarding. It's still in too many places for the complexity of it. But again, it depends on what you're using. If you're an organization you're just using Teams with SharePoint in the background, you've got Exchange in the cloud, and that's really all you're using, it's a very different governance motion than if you have an intranet and you're using Viva modules and you've got thousands of users and a lot of complexity across those multiple geographies. There's just a lot there. And so that it just becomes very complex, and you have to look at data across, unfortunately, dozens of locations, dozens of admin centers and portals and tools to get that comprehensive view. So having a framework, having that, building that out helps you stay ahead of all of that.
And Microsoft has given you guidance on when things are changing. So planning for the future is the other thing that they give you a lot of insight into, especially as an admin.
Yeah. And this is worthy. I think there's a blog post coming out about this one, going through the other best practices. But again, it goes back to understanding roles and responsibilities and clear ownership of containers and what are our constraints across all of these things, establishing clear controls, prioritizing the data protection. So understanding what's being done, what's not being done. Like I can get into the whole thing of why
recording in progress.
Like why a lot of organizations are so recording is in progress, Dan. A lot of organizations that are pushing back on using Loop for some security because they're look at the data protection, look at some of the security issues with it. I don't want to take it sideways talking about Loop, which I love, but has some issues. But regularly monitoring, assessing the risks, ensuring consistent policy enforcement, and what if a policy crosses over multiple areas? How do you enforce that across the dozens of admin centers and all the other things that are out there? And then accountability and transparency. So these are the things that Microsoft is recommending. How you do that, it gets a little bit complex. So, this is just the general, like the SWOT analysis approach to things. So you identify, hey, what are we doing well? What are we exceeding at? Be honest about where are we weak? Where do we have gaps that are known there? Believe me, you'll find a lot of other things that you're not aware of right now. So you might as well start with the things that you are aware of your weaknesses. And then identify, hey, here's opportunities that we can close these gaps right away. It's an incremental, ongoing, forever process. There is no like, hey, we've completed the checklist, we are now governed. Like, no, it's ongoing. And then add to and assess against that governance framework. So here's where we want to leave you with the next steps. you definitely want to go in. And I would say at the bare minimum, on a quarterly basis, you're doing some level of self-assessment of those things. Through that process, if you don't have one in place already today, develop a governance framework. There's plenty of them that are out there. There's guidance. It's like, we can help with that as well, but build a governance framework so that it keeps you on schedule, keeps you on message of, hey, we need to go look at this on a regular clip, and then have that action plan. And again, that's a living, breathing project plan. The thing that's out there is you identify things. You're constantly going to reprioritize. There's always going to be work to do. The good thing, though, I always say that like sprawl in collaboration is a good thing. Yes, it's messy and you've got to clean up, but sprawl also indicates people are using the tools. They're collaborating, and that causes sprawl. And so you can stay on top of that, or you can fall behind and let it hit you like a wave and hire experts to come in and help you fix that until the next time. But those are the high level steps here. And again, just kind of, governance, what it is. We can help you define that for your organization, but you need to define this for your organization. So very quickly, and yes, we'll make the slides available, by the way, how Smarter Consulting can help. So if you've not yet visited our website, we have the governance assessment. So specifically like this, if you know that you don't have the people, you don't have the time or expertise, we actually can, very low cost, help you go in, do an assessment to help you build that current state view, where you are, and then recommendations and action plan for moving forward. On top of that, we have what we call the governance tune-up, where we actually will help you go in and take that action plan. So the assessment is the first part of the tune-up, and then actually go in and implement. If you say, like, we're in this industry, we know we're uncompliant in these areas, we need help to make sure that we are leading rather than trailing, trying to catch up in this space and doing things the way that we need to do it. We can help with that. And then the one other area that we do within governance is we do the co-pilot readiness, because what most people are understanding, waking up to, is that to leverage and get the most out of co-pilot, it's about governance. It's about information architecture. It's about permissions cleanup. It's about like all those things that we've been talking about governance for, me for 30 years. It's the same stuff that needs to be done to be optimized for AI. So if you're interested in finding out more, we do have a 30-minute free consultation. So scan the QR code, visit our website, and find out more. We'll be happy to talk to you and share more information about what we do. And then I didn't provide a link here, Antares, we talked about it, but so next month in September 25th, we will be going through a deep dive on the M365 maturity model and how to leverage that. And there's a lot there too, but we'll talk more about what we're doing, but what you can do. It's all free. It's out there. It's community driven. We, of course, have process methodology for that. So we'd love to help you with that. Any final words? Anything else? I guess I can put this back up on the screen as well, but.
I was just going to say another way to get information on when these webinars and other events are happening would be to go to the Smarter Consulting website, subscribe to the newsletter. It comes out at the beginning of the month because of the holiday. It will be out on Tuesday, September 3rd this month, and then it gets pushed to LinkedIn on the 15th of each month. So you can also subscribe from LinkedIn, and that will have all these links. It will have all the information about upcoming events, webinars, what the different divisions are doing.
A lot of great information and lots of, we're happy to answer questions as well. Dan, final thoughts.
I really appreciate this topic coming up this session, because I am teaching the security governance and compliance course this week. So the webinar fit into what I'm talking about for the rest of the time today perfectly. So thanks for scheduling this topic this week and this time. Perfect way.
And thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say thank you for everybody who dialed in as well. And of course, you've got we can find the three of us out via social. We'll share the slides out in the next day or so, and the recording will be out there on demand. But other than that, yeah, thanks a lot, and I guess allow people to go back to their day, the rest of their day. But thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.